Today we are having a discussion on international relations, foreign policy perspectives. So international relations is a part of General Studies paper 2. As I told you earlier, General Studies paper 2 consists of 3 units: polity, governance and international relations. So international relations carries a consistent 60 to 65 marks every year. So the topic for discussion today: Indian foreign policy is in a state of change. Examine the perspectives in this regard. So the question for discussion is: Indian foreign policy is in a state of change. Examine the perspectives in this regard. So first we have an introduction of how India's foreign policy was restricted to following the policy of non-alignment. What were the factors which necessitated the adoption of the non-aligned policy? How far NAM is relevant in the present? What are the perspectives in India's foreign policy? This is how the answer is being structured for a 200-word note. Why did non-aligned movement remain the cornerstone of India's foreign policy? See, when we achieved independence, we witnessed the Cold War in operation, two powerful blocs. So we wanted autonomy of policy, autonomy in autonomy of decision making in matters of foreign policy, neither without getting into the power play of the two superpowers. That is a policy of neutrality. Autonomy of policy was possible only by adopting a policy of non-alignment. Then the policy of non-alignment was a platform for newly independent nations, countries which came out of the foreign clutches, looked for autonomy, looked for freedom. So they found an instant support in the non-aligned policy. Decolonization. After the Second World War, gradually many of the foreign countries started losing their control of their colonies. So decolonization, emergence of new countries which tasted freedom for the first time, they all opted for a policy of non-alignment. Apartheid and the policy of racial discrimination in South Africa also led to the African countries adopting non-alignment as a part of their foreign policy. Universal nuclear disarmament, which is on the agenda of NAM, found a support in many of the countries. So, due to these reasons, non-alignment remained the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. Relevance of NAM in the present. See, in the present, what happens was shift in the power blocks, disappearance of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union ceased to exist, breakup of the republics. So, how far the NAM was relevant with the disappearance of a power block? Earlier I told you in the onset of Cold War, two power blocks were there. Now with the disappearance of the Soviet Union, we see the disappearance of a power bloc and the emergence of Soviet Union as an independent nation. Now decolonization is complete. There are hardly any colonies. So many countries see they're questioning the relevance of NAM in the present. Again, we take the policy of non-aligned, the nuclear disarmament. No progress has been made as far as nuclear disarmament is concerned. It is a non-starter. Now, countries which were with NAM, who adopted the policy of non-alignment, are able to diversify their relations. They can get the countries of their choice. So, whether the policy of non-alignment will actually be relevant in the present scenario. Then you take the NATO, a powerful military bloc, which is seeing serious divisions in its ranks. So when we started a discussion on The perspectives of India's foreign policy. First, we had an introduction on why NAM remained the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. The reasons we adduced were the policy of Cold War, why India had to adopt a policy of non-alignment so that we can have autonomy of policy making. Then the freshly independent countries which came out of colonial rule, then independent nations saw non-alignment as the ray of hope. Then apartheid, universal nuclear disarmament. These are the pet agendas of NAM. So all these factors made NAM as the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. Then we spoke of how NAM is relevant in the present. We spoke of disappearance of the Soviet Union, the two power blocks becoming one, decolonization disappeared, there was no progress in nuclear disarmament. Then the countries which were earlier with the NAM, they got new relations, they got an opportunity to diversify the relations with different countries. Further, the division within NATO. So these things question the relevance of NAM in the present. With this background, we see the perspectives in India's foreign policy. The first important perspective would be advancing prosperity and influence. So what is this advancing prosperity and influence? It means strengthening, promoting international partnerships with as many countries as possible to advance the sphere of prosperity and sphere of influence. This is an important perspective of India's foreign policy. The second important perspective is decisive shift towards the US. Why the shift towards US is openly seen is because we require the support of the US to contain China. Economic security and interests in the Pacific. So this is an important change in India's foreign policy wherein the policymakers speak of look east and act east. How the countries located in the Indo-Pacific, the relationships with them have to be strengthened not only for commercial interests but also for security purposes. Facing challenges from China in the maritime domain. This is another perspective in India's foreign policy. So how the policymakers are gearing up to face challenges from China in the maritime domain. Simultaneously, we speak of connectivity and cooperation with Afghanistan and Central Asia. We want to be involved in the Afghan peace process once the foreign troops retreat from Afghanistan. We do not want any power vacuum there. There is one more perspective. The US is interested in India developing trade routes through Iran. Why the US is interested in our developing trade routes through Iran is finding routes to Afghanistan and Central Asia bypassing Pakistan and Russia. So this is a new sphere, new perspective which the policymakers are attaching to in India's foreign policy. That is the American interest of finding alternative routes to Afghanistan and Central Asia bypassing Pakistan and Russia. So on this principle, on this concept, both India and the US are united. Now, another important perspective would be how India is going to perform in the United Nations. Say, after a long time, we are entering the Security Council as a non-permanent member. So once we enter the Security Council as a non-permanent member, how are we going to promote our interests? How are we going to tackle the earlier issues, say of disarmament and other related issues which we have been fighting for a long time? So a discussion on India's foreign policy perspectives in this regard, you would have to highlight in brief the reasons for non-alignment movement remaining the cornerstone of the foreign policy. Cite the reasons. This will not take much part of the answer. The points which have to be stressed in the answer is how NAM is not relevant in the present due to changed circumstances. You highlight all the changes which we have discussed earlier. Then you come to the perspectives in India's foreign policy. By perspectives, I mean what are the trends in India's foreign policy, how we are looking at a multifaceted, multi-dimensional relationship. It could be trade, it could be security, it could be look east, act east policy, it could be the tackling the threat of China in the maritime domain, then how a logical shift towards the United States to contain China, and how the US interest for India to develop alternative trade routes so that we could bypass Pakistan and Russia, and finally, how we will play a dominant role in the Security Council because we are entering the Security Council as a non-permanent member after a long time. So how are we going to use the pivotal membership of non-permanent member? How are we going to contribute towards foreign policy? How we are going to strengthen India's interest? How we are going to promote global interests, especially when we talk of nuclear disarmament? So these are the items, the points which can be brought out in the answer to the question on India's foreign policy, emerging perspectives. So as I said earlier, the dynamic part of international relations, we do not have any standard material for this. One suggestion would be go to the website of the Ministry of External Affairs, mea.nic.in. But here also the material is not updated. So what you have to do is, keeping the basic material in hand, make use of whatever points, whatever discussions we are having on this presentation. So this will help you answer a question for 200 words. Apart from this, there are standard books and journals which you may not have much time to read because international relations at the most is getting only 60 marks out of 250. So for 60 marks, the strategy we have adopted is more than enough because the examiner wants to know whether you understood the question. He wants to know that your trend of your answering. He will not expect any detailed presentation, or he will not expect any further elaboration, because what you have read, what you remember, how you convey it in 200 words. That is what the examiner is looking for. Thank you.